Picture this: a stealth jet so clean, so stripped of anything that could betray its presence, that radar operators joked it wouldn't show up even by accident. No tail, no fins, no familiar silhouette for the brain to latch onto. Just a razor-edged diamond gliding through the sky like something stolen from decades in the future. This wasn't concept art from a sci-fi movie. This was Lockheed Martin's X-44 Manta, a proposal so radical it made even the F-22 look conservative. Engineers wanted a fighter that didn't just hide from sensors but practically erased its signature. A machine controlled entirely by thrust, twisting and rolling with engine power instead of traditional surfaces. It promised more stealth, more range, and a level of agility that sounded almost unreal. And here's the twist that aviation circles still argue about. The X-44 wasn't abandoned because it failed. It was abandoned because the world wasn't ready to bet everything on something this different. In this video, we're breaking down the jet that aimed to out-stealth the Raptor, why it looked so strange and how close it came to rewriting air combat. To understand how the X-44 was born, you've got to picture the mindset inside Lockheed's Skunk Works during the late 1990s. The F-22 was still years away from entering service, but even as it took shape, engineers were quietly whispering a question that bordered on heresy. If thrust vectoring can control a jet, do we even need tails anymore? It wasn't a joke. NASA had spent the decade experimenting with tailless drones like the X-36 and modified fighter concepts that proved engines could do far more than push you forward. Engineers began sketching shapes that didn't look like fighters at all. Some looked like manta rays. Others looked like dart heads carved from obsidian. And right in that swirl of ambition came a proposal labeled X-44, a study that wouldn't just tweak the Raptor's design. It would challenge the basic blueprint of fighter aviation. The Air Force wanted something stealthier, something longer-legged, something that could control itself without those radar-reflective vertical fins. The pitch felt like a dare. Take the most advanced fighter America had ever built and delete every stabilizing surface pilots trust with their lives. Replace them with pure engine power and layers of code. If it worked, you'd leapfrog the Raptor before it even rolled off the assembly line. But to understand what the X-44 promised, you need to see the shape that made even veteran pilots blink twice. When engineers unveiled the proposed X-44 silhouette, the reaction was instant. Some stared in awe. Others squinted at the sketches like they were optical illusions. With no tail and no vertical stabilizers, the jet didn't resemble a fighter so much as a flying stealth wedge. A sleek delta stretched wide, with the F-22's nose grafted onto a body shaped for radar evasion at every angle. Pilots called it unsettling. Aerodynamicists called it brilliant. See, tails are great for control but terrible for stealth. Vertical fins reflect radar like little signal mirrors. Delete them, and you strip away one of the biggest contributors to radar signature. For the X-44, the airframe wasn't just low visibility. It was built to vanish from multiple threat angles at once. And that delta wing wasn't just for show. The broader surface meant more internal fuel and longer reach. Estimates suggested it could have flown significantly farther than the Raptor. The shape also promised reduced drag and smoother airflow over the intakes. From above, the jet looked like a single, sculpted piece of carbon and composites. From below, it looked like it could slide across the sky without leaving clues behind. It didn't look wrong. It looked ahead. Almost too far ahead. But there's a reason every fighter you've ever seen has tails. Remove them, and you're not just changing the shape. You're rewriting the rules of flight. Here's where the X-44 stops being bold and becomes downright audacious. This jet wasn't going to steer with rudders or elevators. It would steer with thrust alone. That meant using its twin F-119 engines to twist, roll, and pivot the aircraft by redirecting exhaust in multiple axes. Picture the jet carving turns, climbing, yawing, and sliding sideways purely because the engines decided to bend the laws of motion. The F-22 already used two-dimensional thrust vectoring, mostly for pitch control. Impressive, but limited. The X-44 was meant to go further. Full multi-axis vectoring, where each nozzle could independently swivel and angle, giving the jet razor-sharp control authority without a single tail surface. Of course, that meant the computers would be doing the real flying. Thousands of micro adjustments every second. Every wobble, every gust of wind, every movement of a missile reload or fuel burn would trigger instant compensations across both engines. To pilots, it might feel smooth, almost eerie. But under the skin, the jet would be calculating constantly, fighting physics with math and raw thrust. If the engine vectoring magic worked, the X-44 could surpass the Raptor. And the performance numbers on paper looked almost unreal. The Air Force didn't see the X-44 as a side project. They saw it as a potential successor hiding inside the bones of the Raptor. And once you look at the projected performance figures, it's easy to understand why. Start with stealth. Eliminating the tail could have slashed radar signature across multiple bands, especially from the rear and sides. Analysts hinted the X-44 might have been stealthier than anything America had produced at the time. Add the range advantage. That giant delta wing could carry more fuel than the F-22, potentially giving the X-44 long-endurance patrol reach normally reserved for larger platforms. Perfect for deep strike or high-altitude dominance missions. Speed wouldn't suffer either. With the same F-119 engines, the Manta was expected to reach Raptor-like supersonic speeds without afterburners. Some projections even suggested better efficiency at altitude, thanks to the cleaner aerodynamic profile. And then there was agility. Thrust vectoring across multiple axes could have opened maneuvering envelopes nobody had tested at full scale. Instant pivots. Rapid nose pointing at extreme angles. Movements that bordered on impossible for traditional aircraft. On paper, it wasn't just competitive with the F-22. It threatened to outclass it. So with stealth, speed, and range all on its side, why did this futuristic predator never reach a runway? The answer isn't what most people think. If you're enjoying the story so far, hit the like button and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and lets me bring you even deeper into the jets the world never got to see. For all its promise, the X-44 had a shadow side. The kind that makes test pilots sweat and program managers lose sleep. Removing the tail wasn't just bold, it stripped away a huge chunk of natural stability. Every fighter in history, even the unstable ones, relied on some aerodynamic surface to catch the air and keep the nose honest. The X-44 had none of that. If the engines glitched, the control laws hiccuped, or the nozzles lagged by a fraction of a second, the aircraft could tumble before a pilot even understood what happened. And battle damage? That's where the risk went from theoretical to terrifying. Lose hydraulic pressure in a tail, and most aircraft can limp home. Lose thrust vectoring in a tailless jet, and the odds aren't kind. Engineers knew these problems were solvable, but not cheaply, not quickly, not while the Air Force was already neck-deep in Raptor costs and drowning in paperwork for the Joint Strike Fighter. The X-44 wasn't impossible. It was demanding. A project that needed money, time, and faith. But faith alone doesn't keep a prototype alive, especially when a budget war erupts around it. By the turn of the 2000s, the Air Force was juggling too many expensive dreams at once. The F-22 was late, over budget and fighting political battles it never recovered from. Congress wanted answers, not another pitch deck about a radical idea that looked like a UFO. Then came the money vacuum, the Joint Strike Fighter. The F-35 promised affordability, international partnerships, and a production run so massive it would reshape the entire defense industry. It became the chosen child. Everything else became optional. And optional programs are usually the first to be cut. The X-44 wasn't competing against a rival airframe. It was competing against accounting spreadsheets, political messaging, and a military that suddenly needed to justify every dollar. A no-tail, thrust-only fighter sounded amazing to engineers. To budget committees, it sounded like more risk, more cost, more delays. Funding evaporated before a single prototype was built. A handful of studies survived, some wind tunnel work, some control law modeling, but the dream itself shelved quietly. Still, the story doesn't end with cancellation, because the ideas inside the X-44 refused to die. Here's the twist most people never hear about. A small classified drone called the X-44A did take to the skies. Built quietly by Skunk Works, it tested many of the X-44's core ideas in a compact, unmanned frame. Tailless, sharp edges, thrust-centric control philosophy. It flew in the early 2000s without fanfare, without public reveal, and without a glamorous rollout. Just a dark little proving ground for a concept too advanced to risk on a manned prototype. The existence of the X-44A wasn't revealed until 2018, and even then, details were scarce. But what it confirmed was huge. The engineers weren't guessing. They were experimenting, validating, learning how tailless stealth behaves in the real world. That drone proved something vital. The X-44 wasn't fantasy. It was part of a lineage, a stepping stone toward a future everyone suspected was coming, but no one was brave enough to build at full scale. And that future comes into focus when you look at the jets now being sketched for the next generation. Look at the concept art for America's Next Generation Air Dominance program. The tailless shapes, the blended wings, the long, stealth-first airframes, the engines buried deep inside smooth geometry. It all feels familiar, doesn't it? Almost like someone took the X-44, expanded the wingspan, added newer engines, and upgraded the stealth coating. That's the impact of a project that never flew. Its ideas seeped into the design culture. Engineers learned that to reach the next level of stealth, you'd eventually have to delete the tail. There's no other way to hide from modern radar. You can see hints of the X-44's philosophy in European sixth-generation studies, in China's tailless prototypes, even in unmanned combat jets being prepped for autonomous missions. The Manta didn't vanish. It dispersed, became a blueprint fragment that appears in every next-generation rendering. Engineers call that influence without lineage. A quiet revolution. But there's one more question that haunts the X-44 project, long after the budgets were cut and the studies shelved. Imagine an alternate timeline where the Air Force didn't blink, where the X-44 got the green light, where test pilots stepped into a cockpit without a tail behind them and trusted the engines to do the impossible. Picture a fleet of razor-edged fighters patrolling the upper atmosphere, outranging everything else in the sky and slipping past radar grids built for shapes that no longer exist. A jet that could pivot instantly, strike deep, disappear again, and reappear only when the mission was done. Imagine adversaries scrambling to decode an aircraft with almost no radar return. An airframe that looked like the future, because it was the future. Would it have worked? Maybe brilliantly, maybe disastrously. That's the gamble the Air Force wasn't ready to take. But that unknown is exactly why the X-44 still captivates aviation fans. It represents a possibility. A glimpse of what happens when engineers reach too far ahead and the world hesitates. The X-44 never touched a runway, yet its shadow still stretches across everything being designed today. It showed how far we could push stealth, how wild the future might look, and how quickly vision can be buried by caution. Some jets win wars, others change thinking. The X-44 did the latter. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.